gives me great pleasure to introduce our next presenter, Nanci Trivellato. As I mentioned previously, this presentation will be given in Spanish as well as Portuguese. Nanci Trivellato has a master's degree in psychology and is a senior researcher with the IAC. She is the author of the book Vibrational State and Energy Resonance and a charter member of the IAC and IACT. She established the Journal of Consciousness, of which she was chief editor for over 15 years. She has lectured and offered coaching around the world on non-ordinary phenomena, subtle energy, and OBEs for over 25 years. She was honored with the IAC Global Award for Contributions to Consciousness Science for her research on the vibrational state. She is here to present Between Fear and Confusion, the Overlooked Lonely World of Children with Psi Perceptions. Welcome, Nanci.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Hello. Thank you for being here. I would like to mention two things before I go directly to the data. The first thing I would like to say is that my study is not about fear. My study is about psi experiences or psychic experience, if we are going to put this in a simpler way, among children. Nonetheless, because of the data I collected, I noticed that fear is an important component. The first motivation I had to do this research was actually because of myself, because I had some of these experiences when I was a child. And of course, I would have been so thankful if I had more information, if there were a book available teaching about this. I have read and researched everything I could in respect to this phenomenon. Nonetheless, I think we don't find information to the level that I think would be helpful. So I would love to provide that. But I do not want or didn't want to provide that just from the top of my mind, based on anecdotal experience, on my own experience. So I wanted to collect more data and do deeper study. And actually, I found something very interesting. I'm going to try to share with you as much data as possible as the time allows, but I wanted to mention that. And that's why I put a spin here in my title about fear and confusion, because I see children are very much trapped between both. The other thing I want to mention before anything is that there are three different interpretations to these conditions among children. And I think all of us are going to agree that it's very difficult to diagnose anything in children, right? They do not know necessarily how to explain what they are feeling, what's going on. And when it comes to anything that is more subjective, it's even harder. So we are in a condition that we need to look for signs, more specific ones, and of course that is what is being looked for amongst educators, psychologists, neuroscientists, but I think we can go further in that. The three main approaches that there is to this is, number one, it's a normal thing, meaning child's fantasy, just lying, maybe just imagining, that's normal, never mind, it's just something childish. I agree that some cases it is what it is, absolutely. Child have a fertile imagination, which is natural and healthy, and we need to account for that. We need to be able to spot that. So I absolutely agree with that. Second approach, it's a more medical approach, is that all hallucination. It is all maybe some abnormal condition, some sort of disorder to be understood. Maybe we treat, maybe we don't, but that's a disorder. I agree with that. I think some cases it is, of course. Some cases may be psychiatric cases. Some cases may be even imbalances, even in diet, even the biochemistry of the body. So we have also to account to that. And I think it's important to have this approach. The third one is more for those that acknowledge and accept the possibility of a phenomenon that would be beyond the brain, that would be sensing something that's not in the body, not only in the physical dimension. So we are going to call it psi perception or psi phenomena, but that is the one that I do not agree with the approach. I know it's going to sound contradictory, but it's not. You're going to see why. Because everyone who studies that from the point of view of a psychic perception definitely will see children in this condition as advanced, special. So whilst for some, it's normal, nothing to pay attention to, for others, it's abnormal, then for someone else, which would include psi phenomena, it's special, it's advanced. I don't agree, and I don't like this approach. I think it's normal, just specific condition. And we need to be able to acknowledge all of this blend of different conditions, and that's the challenge. So these are the things that I wanted to make sure they were clear from the beginning. To start, I want to read to you 3 excerpts of 3 accounts that help to illustrate what I'm going to discuss and the information here. Allow me, please, I'll have to go down to read this with you. I was afraid from 4 to 12. I knew there were intangible people around. I could feel it. Sometimes I would hear them. Sometimes I would see them. And sometimes I would feel them touching me. Going to sleep was never a good experience. I started drowsing and I would sense these things. And I would very often wake up in the middle of the night and sense them too. I also had lots of sleep paralysis and falling sensation. I was completely alone with this thing. Nobody knew how to help me. When I told my mother, I saw the fear in her face. She was paralyzed. She did not want me to notice that, but it was easy to notice. So I thought there was something wrong with me, with my mind. Then I did not say it again. My loving parents could not understand what I was going through, and this was subject 16. Another case, I don't know myself without these phenomena or these perceptions. This has always been there since my first memory. I knew I was walking with them, meaning non-physical beings, and this was normal. My twin sister and I talked about it because she saw and heard the same things. Noticing them would make the connection with them stronger. So I learned to ignore them and think about something else when passing by them so that they wouldn't notice I noticed them. My twin, though, was very afraid. She was always hiding and traumatized. I was so fed up with them. I was not scared and would aggressively tell them to go away. I saw things that are not normal, like the bed blanket levitating. They were playing with us. They found somebody who was a perfect victim with no parent guidance, no protection. It was perfect for them to have a good laugh. They were opportunists. Subject 25. And then another one, just to illustrate the points I will discuss. I felt presence in the bedroom. From 6 to 8 was the worst. I would sometimes feel their touch. I tried to resist not to go to my mom's room. It seemed like an eternity. I would cover myself, but still could feel their touch through the sheets. Some nights I could not fall asleep, and others I felt they woke me up in the middle of the night. Often there would be noises in the room. I'd stay without moving for a long, long time. Sometimes I would pray. When I could, I turned the lights on. The fear was so much I couldn't clearly discern and put into words what was happening. I was extremely introvert and shy. I felt bad and yawned a lot while close to people. So I had few friends. My family was a spiritist, but no one approached me to help. So, what is this? Psi-perception or parasomnia? So according to the conventional view, it's all parasomnias. For those who are not familiar with the expression, parasomnias are like undesirable states, conditions, events that we would have during sleep. And the explanation that we have nowadays is that it's because of transitions of consciousness states, like a transition between wakefulness and a sleep state, but it seems wakefulness penetrated sleep states, but then the sleep state would somehow also transpire and infiltrate, intrude somehow the waking state and vice versa. So for you to have an idea, among parasomnias, we have here nightmare disorder, night terror, sleep paralysis, sleepwalking, sleep aggression and agitated sleep. Secondary symptoms of parasomnia, floating sensation, flying, seeing someone who is not there, not in the room, sensing physical touch or sexual experience, seeing one's own body, falling sensation, losing sense of the body, feeling one with the universe, feeling detached from the body, ESP, extrasensory perception, hearing sounds and voices, perceiving presences or intruders in the room. So pretty much I think all of us, or at least I can say for myself, I might have a lot of parasomnias then, but I think it deserves attention from a different point of view here. And that is what I want to bring, just to give you an idea of some of these studies, and I think that is important to acknowledge. 13.4%, I'll read from here, 13.4% of children worldwide are diagnosed with mental disorder. This is a meta-analysis from 2015, it's very recent. One of the studies that was analyzed, just for us to have an idea, is the second one that you see here. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, another point here, then I go to the second study. Between 13 to 20% of children aged 3 to 17, so it's nearly 1 in every 5 children in the United States, are diagnosed with mental disorder in a given year. So I think that is very high. And I think there must be something wrong, either with our kids, either with what we are eating, or with the diagnosis. And I believe it's with the diagnosis, okay? So that is the point I want to make. Also here, diagnosing and treating children. Overdiagnosis and misdiagnosis of child and adolescent mental disorder often occurs. That is a meta-analysis for 2017. I'm sorry, it's very faint there. Hope you can read. So I think that's very relevant. Many studies were done there, and that's the second study I was going to mention to you. Amongst children that have had an onset of schizophrenia before age of 12, there had been a study in which they were reevaluated, and 73% of them, and there were 71 cases that were studied, 73% of them received a diagnosis other than schizophrenia. So I think that's relevant for us to acknowledge. Another point here is about nightmares and night terrors. As you have seen from the accounts, it's something that happens quite often among these children. So it is accepted that nightmares are underdiagnosed and undertreated. 18% of children and 18% of children aged 6 to 11 experience night terror. That is a study with 300 kids in Germany. I think it's also very high, 18%. Higher than I expected. I do not know how you feel about it. Parents should not interrupt, and that is the treatment, because nowadays, at least parasomnia is no longer only seen like an abnormality. They say it's normal. Okay, it's very strange, but easy to diagnose, normal. So many studies point to it in this way. But whilst it's easy to diagnose and treat, it doesn't seem to be treated at all. So then the point here is that one of the treatments that was proposed was that parents should not interrupt the episodes and should let them continue until concluded. Children often won't remember them and will overgrow them. So you imagine you have a night terror, you don't remember in the morning, and that's okay because you won't remember. So don't interrupt. Let your child be desperate for as long as it takes. It's pretty much that to help parents. And I understand because I think we do lack understanding about some of these cases, as I mentioned before. Inconsolability, in this case in night terror, is a key behavior in children who display emergence delirium. So pretty much all of the things I described before, seeing your body, sensing someone there, sensing a touch, feeling detached from the body or anything like that, it's hallucination and in many cases associated with night terror. And that's more or less what we read from here. Sleep paralysis, in this case, isolated sleep paralysis, meaning not connected with any other type of condition or disorder. Sleep paralysis prevalence is as high as 62% in certain groups. There are many studies that have been done exclusively on sleep paralysis, and of course it varies a lot depending on how the question was asked, right? What was the wording? What is the cultural background of that group that was studied? But 62% is very high. Most of the studies point to 40, 43, 38. That is the majority of the studies there. 40% of college students in Japan suspect a relation with spirits and supernatural powers that would be operating while they had the sleep paralysis. Many other studies were done on sleep paralysis following this one. And all of these other studies confirmed it's consistent. Different population, totally different countries, different researchers. When they compare data, all of them sense there is something else there. So the data is there, no problem with that. The problem is the interpretation, because it funnels to a point that immediately the conclusion in the interpretation is that is delirium, that's hallucination, there's nothing there. And I think maybe it would be interesting at least to take into consideration that maybe there's something there. But of course, if academia in general would do that, that would mean accepting a paradigm that there's something beyond our ordinary physical world, and that would be very complicated. But on the other hand, we are talking about individuals' life. We are talking about human beings, and more than anything, we are talking about children who need support. Otherwise, the cases of the children I have studied here, and I'm going to share with you, maybe one of them is a little bit traumatized. Two, perhaps, I would say, if I'm going to be broader on that. All of the other ones are very balanced in spite of their experiences. So I think it must be studied and acknowledged. It was concluded that it occurs in normal persons. So that was a study with young adults also. That was also in Japan. And then another study with almost 7,000 participants, and that was done in Canada, concluded that between 78 to 98% of those who experience sleep paralysis fear that. So, a very recent study, 2017, published that the vivid and sometimes terrifying dreams can spill over into emerging wakefulness. Hypnagogic and hypnopompic hallucinations occur in all sensory modalities and include out-of-body experiences and sensing and seeing the presence of menacing intruders. And then, based on all of that, we have the information that is spread to the public with the popular publications. In this example here, Scientific American Mind magazine. Some people are certain they have experienced paranormal events. In reality, many of these victims probably had an episode of sleep paralysis. And again, period, nothing else is studied. So this study here, and what is it that I did? This is an exploratory study. Because what I wanted to find out is, do children have any type of experience? Is it consistent? What sort of phenomenon is more common? If there is one that is more common, what can we learn from that? So it was exploratory in a sense that I wanted to collect data without preconceived idea. So I collected qualitative data, which is very complex, but I thought that would provide me with angles and with a context for each case, because I think it's important to contextualize each case. Who is the person? Was this person educated in a very religious context? Was this person very repressed? Who this person became? So I think that needs to be taken into consideration. So each case was studied individually, but I also tried to put together some of this data in a way that I could have some quantitative data, just because I think that helps us to establish pattern, helps us to learn. So it's more like an empirical study to this point. I conducted 31 interviews, some of them 2.5 hours long. Age of those who were interviewed from 2.5 to 57, and of course a 2.5-year-old baby. I was with the mother, right? So the mother was telling me things while I was observing the baby, and so it was an interactive thing. but I also have some that I collected through written data, so questionnaire, people who contacted me via messaging or sent me questionnaires, but I interact with them. So that is how the data was collected. It's a total of 36 subjects. Their age, again, from 2.5 to 57. And the younger ones were, besides the baby, 5, 10, 12, 13, and 17. The mean or the median, it's all very consistent. It's around the third 5-year-old, just for you to have an idea of the population, who they grew up to be. And let me follow this from here. Most of them are in the area of economy and administration, as you can see, the majority, 9, but I must mention that many of them with post-graduation, doctorate degree, 2 of them working in national treasury departments for 2 different countries, university lecturers, business people, entrepreneurs, in arts, 7 of them, so the majority is musicians in terms of percentage. Exact science, engineers, electricians, architect, health. We had 3 medical doctors and 1 medical student. Social science, psychologist, psychotherapist, a researcher, and so forth. So pretty much people who are living their lives normal. I think that is important to be acknowledged. Another thing that I believe it's relevant here is that 90% of the adults, of course I'm not computing here children because they didn't grow up yet, so they cannot be anything, we cannot study it, but considering the adults, 90% of them still have sight perceptions, so they did not stop having them. Only 2 of them fear their experience now. 19 or 66% perceive their sight perception as having been positive to their lives. 7 perceive as neutral or not sure, but most think it was something that taught them it was important. 3 of them, nowadays or after they grow up, they have any connection to religion or would ever use the word pray or God or anything like that. The others didn't even mention it, don't have any religion at all. 2 of them just continue with what they have been taught, and 1 became religious. Would be interesting to study this separately, but I want to give you more general data about what has been collected. 2 of them resort to prescribed medicine, like psychedelic medicine or drugs. Religious background, I don't find this was relevant at all, just mentioned here so you see. I divided that into different categories, those that are mildly religious or very strongly religious, but I don't think it's worth spending time on this because there was nothing very interesting. 42% of those who were interviewed never heard about our work, were not IAC students, are not connected to the IAC, so it's not like, oh, these people read so much about OB stuff, they are with their minds completely, washed and trained. No, people never heard of it. Actually, some people didn't even understand the expressions. If I say multidimensional experiences, what is multidimensional? I have to have debates with them for them to understand what I mean by multidimensional. But that is what I found that was interesting to hear from them, because the point was to get a blend of different experiences. Nonetheless, all of them approached me, or I approached them because I thought they had some psi experiences as children. And then gender, I think here we have something to comment. 72% of those who replied were female. And at the beginning I thought just random, maybe women were more communicative, but I think this is something that deserves study, because many other of the studies that had been done, even about sleep paralysis and other things, points that more female report their experience. Maybe it's the way they sense it, it's the way they communicate it, maybe they are more open to speak about it. I don't know, but I think that is something for us to study. I don't believe there is any difference in terms of psychic perception between men and women, or male or female. I don't think so. But I think we need to understand the data, right? So we need to see what's behind there. Nonetheless, 80% of the male population had OBEs as compared to female, only 65%. And 84% of a female population perceived presences or energy as compared to 50% of male. And that is consistent with something that I have already observed through our students and friends and people who contact us in many different ways. And that's something I mentioned to Wagner. He was pointing to me that he also thought of that. Because when we think of, for example, books on out-of-body experience and reports on out-of-body experience, if we check, majority are male that are doing the account. Whilst when we see about channeling, healing, and this sort of thing, majority are women. So maybe there is some sort of association there. Again, I think this needs confirmation, but it's suggestive. And other studies that I do not have the time to mention also point to something similar. But I think a proper meta-analysis and comparison all of that is due. And I intend to do it. Countries of origin and residence, I also found there was no significance. I didn't see any pattern, but I must mention that there were 13 countries of origin, 8 countries of residence among those whom I have interviewed. Majority of countries of origin was Brazil, majority of country of residence was United States. Use of illicit hallucinogenic drugs. Sorry, there is a symbol there that invaded, but that is a problem of the formatting here. I didn't have this in my computer, but I hope you can read there well. I asked all of those that I could if they had ever used any type of drug when they were kids. By the way, I like to say that I never, ever, ever touched any sort of drug in my life, except maybe for antibiotic here and there, and aspirin or something like this that is unavoidable, right? But I think this was important to collect. And some of the kids, because when you see here, are not applicable, oh, sorry for that, not applicable to very young child, that's not applicable, unless their parents will be giving it to them. But the other ones, I think 8-year-olds, 10-year-old, we don't know. But I did not want to ask. I didn't find room to ask. Some did not report. I didn't ask, but you see 8. But the majority, 72%, was very clear. They have never used. The data you see behind in blue is use of some sort of drug later in life as adults. And that is a case of not so many used. Some just tried. Most of them reported just trying or using cannabis. But still, I think it's important. So I'm talking to an adult, right? So to know the population and who I'm talking to there. So that's why I am presenting this information here. Personality trait. That is some other aspect that I thought was interesting and relevant. 86% of those who participated were introverts, or I'm sorry, 86% of those who perceived presences, and that's up here at the right, they were introverts. You can see there the total of the population, 61% of those who participated in this study, they were introverts. I had a hypothesis that the majority would be introvert, but I had never collected data. Actually, I have a lot of interviews that I have done for a different purpose, but just for the sake of this research, I always collected the information how they were as a kid, introvert, extrovert, because I was studying this phenomenon in kids for many, I have been studying for many years. I still need to put that together, but this population of 36 here confirms that 61% were introvert. Now, majority of those who perceived presence were introvert, so you see the percentage there. Majority of those who had OBEs were also introvert, 72% versus 55. 57% of the introverts had both OBEs and perceived presences, as compared to 33% of the extroverts. And that's not to say extroverts don't have experiences. You'll see one case that I hope I get time to detail more with you and study that case more specifically. It's an extrovert woman. So I do not mean to label anything here, but this data, I think it's important for us to understand what is going on. The reported experience, here's where I want to dedicate more time because it's what people told me. Just want to point out, of course, I'm talking to an adult. And then when they would tell me something, I would always ask them, when was that? And take note of the age for many different reasons. And also because I want to make sure I won't take note of what is before they reach age of 14. Because we have to establish a limit. So until when you are a kid, sometimes people call a 17, 18-year-old a kid. I'm not sure that is a kid. But for this study, I thought up to 14 would be what we had to study because of the psyche of the children at this point. So one element here that I would like to mention is the age when the experiences started. You see here that the majority of them fall here around 5-year-old. So we see the distribution from 2, which is several of them told me, since 2 I remember this, but also the little girl I told you about, she was 2. And being 2, it's very hard to say what she had was any type of hallucination and what was she behaving to. She was brought to me by her mother, and her mother was a medical doctor, and she was confused as to how to deal with the little girl. The little girl was extrovert, very happy, normal girl, chatting, walking around, was not shy, absolutely normal. Had many friends from what they told me, but some nights, the little girl would wake up in the middle of the night with night terror. It would be very hard to understand what was going on. The 2 siblings, including another sister that's very little difference in age, never behaved in the same way. So that's why the mother was so puzzled. But the little girl would wake up and point to a corner and say, there is a woman dressed like this and this and this there. And then parents do what? They are scared to death. What if there's a ghost here? What do I do? And what if my child is crazy? And they are completely lost. Maybe they are more afraid than the child. I don't know. This guy's better. But then they grab the child. Oh, let's go play. Go to the living room, blah, 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 blah. Okay. The child comes back. There is a woman there dressed like this, blah, 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 blah. And then they get more spooked. So that repeated from what the mother told me like 4 times. So then, how can an hallucination be so stable, so steady? And then you put the child somewhere else, the hallucination goes away just because you moved from one room to another. So that is, something that needs to be explained in different ways than just hallucination. And one of the points that I collected very carefully when I spoke with people, because you see, I tried to get information in a natural way from them. Because if I ask, have you had this? Have you had that? Maybe the answer is not so natural, so I wanted to let them tell me their stories. And I would just guide lightly. So I would understand actually. I wanted to make sure I understand, so then I would sometimes exchange. But in this case, some of these people, they report that they had experiences that were very dependent on the location. They had psi experience in other places, but the location, the room, sometimes specifically a room in the house, would make difference as compared to another room. And in one room, they would be afraid. In the other room right beside, they wouldn't. So they would run from one room to another to sleep. So something is in that room. And in that case, it was not a bad smell. Okay? So what is there? I think these specific elements of individual cases makes us reflect about some of the aspects that we need to understand more. Anyways, so going back here, I asked about out-of-body experience. You see my findings. That is one of the things that surprised me. I thought out-of-body experience was less common than I actually found it was. And after speaking with all of these people, I come to conclude that maybe we need to have different types of studies about the out-of-body experience, because when you ask somebody, have you left your body? That immediately brings to us a set of preconceived ideas, and maybe beliefs, maybe fears, and maybe prejudice, even in a child. Because what is this, leave the body? Whilst when you are talking and hearing what the child is saying, they are telling about that in an absolute natural way, as if it's the same as going to out to play and come back, because for them that's natural. So how much of maybe reduction in that we experience later in life is just because of education, just because we need to conform, just because we heard too many times that's not normal, or just because we have not found proper notions, concepts, explanations, because without explanation, you are very much dealing with a reality that it's unpalpable, it's intangible, you have no words to report, to refer to it, you cannot see what's going on. Most of the experiences that produced fear were those that the child could not see what was going on, was just sensing. So that was more fearful than seeing, as you'll see in a moment. So I believe there is something here for us to study. Anyway, 69% of the population I interviewed had no fears of the OBE. I'll go back there to the left for a moment. 26% of the subjects, so 72% of the total population, had OBEs or reported to me things that were very much like an OBE, even if they did not use the term. As you can very well acknowledge, somebody can come to me and tell me, oh, I had an out-of-body experience. But when I hear it, I say, that's not an out-of-body experience. That is a dream. Or you just read that in a book and you are imagining that. It's very, very difficult to separate what our brain creates from what is the real concept. And I think that is a problem. So I believe every time we are in doubt, we should dismiss as a phenomenon, because it's better to be safe. And whatever we acknowledge as a psi phenomenon, we have to be relatively, to the point that it's healthy scientifically, certain that that is something other than just brain producing any sort of reaction there. So, but that is how I assessed that. So still being conservative, 69% of them. In terms of fearing that, I think it's important to point at this. 4 of them told me they had, so you see the great majority, no fear, nothing. Even though they were afraid of other things that were happening, maybe half an hour before or half an hour later. But when I point there in this scale, and in my paper I'll present several scales in detail, but I did not have the time here. I created a scale for clairvoyance, a scale for OBE, so that we are not just saying yes or no, we need to see the degrees. But sense of confusion, meaning, oh, is this the real life? Is not, what is going on? It's more like, wow, I'm seeing my body, what is this? It's more like a surprise than anything, but I marked that as something that was not neutral. So I marked that as 1 in the scale. Or sorry, 2, sense of confusion, 4 of them. One of them reported they were a little concerned. Is this an illness? Am I going to die? What's going on? So it was more like a concern. 1 was afraid of the sensations, like the ballooning or feeling the vibrations or whatever sensation was accompanying. This one was afraid, but I must mention that this only case that reported number 4 here in my scale had sleep paralysis. Nobody had strong fear of the experience. Nobody said, I was afraid of being out of the body. When I was there, that was terribly fearful. No, none of this population. I know there are cases of people who does, but we are studying percentages here, and we are studying a specific population. 2 of them were not sure if they had OBs. And then when I studied sleep paralysis, and this I just collected for curiosity, but I thought I should mention here because many studies in parasomnia, study sleep paralysis, many people talk about it because it seems to be more common than we would think. People don't like to talk about it. Many times it comes accompanied with bad sensations, sensations even of intrusion, aggression, being persecuted. In some cases, it is accompanied by sensation, for example, of sexual experience, sexual connotation of some type. So that's why then I pointed this to show you. 39% of them had sleep paralysis, experienced sleep paralysis before 14. But several of those who said no, which is therefore there are 10 of them who said no, they mentioned only later, only after 14 they had. So it seems that perhaps it's more common after adolescence. 8% of them were not sure if they had or not, they didn't remember, and 9 were not reported or not applicable. I'm not going to ask a child, have you ever felt paralyzed with somebody around? Because the moment I ask that, I am painting with the child's mind, so I could not ask everybody, and some people did not report, and I did not want to push it. Experiences of sexual assault, which is a common expression in the studies. So that's why I put there between inverted commas, because most people refer as this. And also I thought, because many people refer to this, it was interesting to see what happens in childhood. And keeping in mind we are focusing about childhood phase. Those of you who perhaps heard one conference I did on psychic children, and I mentioned a little bit about how my experiences were, and of course it's what inspired me. I never had any sexual connotation experience. So I assumed it was maybe just my case, or not common, but I thought it was not so common. And I wanted to confirm. So you see here that the majority of children, 53%, said no. But nonetheless, of course, again, I don't have reports of everybody. So I have 4 cases I did not collect because they were young children. I was not going to ask this to them, of course. 1 did not report, 4 did not remember, were not sure, or they said cannot recall, I just kept it the way they told me. 2 said yes, but very infrequent, was not traumatizing. No was the majority, which somehow was consistent with how my experience was. Nonetheless, from those who said no, and I do not have the percentage here to show you, but it was a significant number, said only after 14 or only after 15, only after 17, which seems normal or not normal, common, better word perhaps, but later in life. And the whole point is how much of this is just our brain, because sex is a natural thing, so we could naturally relieve that and produce those images in our brain. Could be a dream, could be a nightmare, because nightmares, simple nightmares exist. But my point here is, are all nightmares only in the brain, only a nightmare? Or could there be a mix and something not completely physical, or the physical world be participating there? And my hypothesis is that in some cases that's what happens. So some of the nightmares, we sense there's a component there that is real. And some of these physical assaults, I'm sorry, sexual assaults or physical, feels pretty real, and the person is even sometimes half awake. So, but not with kids, or not so often with kids. So I think that is something interesting for us to study. Clairvoyance and clairaudience. I verified that. And I established a degree. And here what I'm pointing to you, I'm sorry, it's lacking legend. It's fear of the clairvoyance. But what I got, let me read from here because I cannot see there. And I established a degree that I will be in my paper, from minor clairvoyance or clairaudience to remarkable, seeing clearly, repeatedly, 22 subjects experienced clairvoyance, so 61%. 36% experienced clairaudience, and 28% had both clairvoyance and clairaudience. I only present here fear of clairvoyance just because it was more common. So that's what I wanted to present. 27% no fear, little fear, nobody. Some had fear, yes, 27, another 27%, but it was like bearable, did not impairing. Constant apprehension, meaning I am expecting that the whole time, so it starts to interfere with life. And number 5 here was terrifying powerlessness. The child felt like there was nothing the child could do, and it was just, when that happens, I have to freeze, nothing else. And many of them would freeze. So that was a very traumatizing experience for some. Perception of intangible presences and fear of that, 83% of the population claimed they sensed no physical entities. You see the fear that they had. When I'm separating here, during the night or nighttime, and during daytime. You see that the fear at nighttime, which is the one that is in red, is much stronger, whilst the majority during the day have no fear or just a bearable fear. The majority in the evening or during the night experience very strong fear, incapacitating fear. So we have many hypotheses we could raise from this. I'm not going to have the time to discuss them. Maybe it's just an instinctive thing because it's night. Maybe. But many of those who described their experience, they said, when I was a child, I would pray because I thought maybe I connect with something good because I felt when I was afraid, I would sense more and see more, and I would be closer to these presences. So to what extent it is because it is night and then it's instinctive, but to what extent is because it's silent, we feel alone, and then we have more fear, we connect more. To what extent it is because perhaps if there is anything out there or anyone out there, maybe because of the psychological condition, they have more freedom, to come closer. We don't know, but those are the numbers we find out, and I think this is the key point for me in this study. And that is one of the objectives behind, because we need to inform. We need to have children less afraid. Oh, number one technique, the most perhaps ubiquitous advanced technique is cover your face, cover your whole body. Some people even use a blanket even in the summer, but you leave a little hole to breathe. And that you feel safer, but still terrified underneath. Here you see some of the techniques that the children used. I'm going to comment just a couple of them. Number one is seeking asylum, going to parents' room or something like that. And then we would just assume, yeah, you go to parents' room, you feel safer. You feel safer because you are with grown-ups. You are with those who take care of you. But I had cases of children who reported when the mother knew they were afraid and said, please, come here, sleep here. It would get much worse. But many years later, this person specifically that I have in my mind reported that she found some things about her father that was very consistent with what she perceived in the room. So again, seeking asylum, what does that change in terms of the energy, in terms of the psychology and what that represents? You see crying just one, so I think we cannot trust only the child crying or not. Turning on the light may be a sign to parents, and I think what we can draw from here is maybe we could point to a few signs that would help parents to understand their kids and see how to help them. Other reported experience, just to mention, is like precognition or intuition, knowing what's going to happen. Many of them reported that. I kind of separate those who had clear vision and those who felt intuitively, but 9 of them. Retrocognition or past life recall, there were 3 cases that I thought were very, very significant. Of course, they did not know dates or name of places or name of people, but the way they reported and the detail and how they experienced that were very interesting. 3 cases that I did not expect at all were an expansion of consciousness, like samadhi, illumination, something. This is a relatively rare phenomenon among adults. But I think 3 reported that spontaneously to me. So I think that is interesting and requires further study. 1 near-death experience. Most of them felt the guidance and support they received from their parents. For those who asked for guidance and support, you see that almost half did not. But those who asked, they felt whatever they heard from their parents did not help at all. Some felt it helped very little. The 4 cases that said, yes, it helped me. I learned few things and I got better. Those 4 cases were children who told me. And these children had parents who had taken courses with the IEC, and all I can infer from that is that dealing with the subject in a more, how would I say, natural way, without making of that a mystery, a fantasy special, but being scientific but not rigid, understanding the mechanisms, I think gave parents better tools to understand, to support their kids, and that is how I conclude or how I interpret this, but this is the data that I got. One case, I'm going to read very quickly because I think it will illustrate. This is a female, extrovert, 33-year-old. It's a medical doctor. She's married with a child. About her fear, the experiences were terrible, very bad. It was an extreme, excessive, and outrageous fear. It was more than fear. It was panic. It happened during the whole time I lived in that house, which was around 10 years. I felt presences in the house. I had nightmare almost every night. And I would wake up 2 to 3 times every night, feeling afraid. And then I was not able to move. While I finally would go back to sleep, in many occasions I would just have another nightmare. I also felt those same presences during the day. They had a confrontational attitude. Both my sister and I had nightmares in that house. I thought it was natural and everybody was like that. So I didn't used to talk about my nightmares. About how she verbalized. She mentioned to me her words here. I only could say I was afraid. I was not able to verbalize what was going on. My parents would tell me I didn't need to be so afraid, but it was uncontrollable because I was really feeling those presence right by my side. Many times I would even feel them poking me. Corroboration-ish, of course, but I think it's interesting points here for us to make. After we moved out of that house, I came to learn my father had lived there when he was a boy, and he had the same experiences and terror, including feeling he was poked. My great-great-parent, who was the owner of the house, committed suicide after we moved out of the house, so she contextualized that. Location-dependent experience, which I thought was one of the points I always took note of. I also perceived presences in other places, like when I was in someone else's house or in our country house, but they were not frightening. Only in that specific house it was that bad. When I moved out of that house, I went to live in a pension for students, which was dark and old, but I never felt afraid there. I would stay in my room alone and would feel there was something else there, but I was not afraid of the presences I sensed there. Guidance. It was a pity no one told me what it was or taught me how to use my energies. Nowadays that I understand about energy or subtle energy, I have all of those experiences, including OBEs, but I don't have fear. So, few points here for us to discuss so I can finalize. Number one, some of the things that points to some findings. I have mentioned some of them, so I want just to wrap up. I think there is a suggestion somehow, or the experience is suggestive of a relationship between gender and type of psi experience, and between introversion and level of psi sensitivity. Parents' discourse, the reaction of parents can be worse than the experiences per se. So it's very important to educate population about that. Vibrational state is uncommon before 14, which to me was an interesting surprise. Only 3 cases were reported. Everyone who reported said after 14. So low association of fear with out-of-body experience, which for me was also surprising. I never felt fear of my out-of-body experience, but to me, it was an exception. That's what I assumed. So it was very important to collect the data. And there are many different hypotheses we could bring to explain that. And of course, from psychological aspects, but also from maybe non-physical aspects that I think we could raise at some point. Difficulty for subjects to label or categorize their experiences. This I think is very important because when you have a name for something, when it's a phenomenon you know, you kind of can assimilate better that idea. If you don't know what that is, and that is very subjective, very strange, out of the ordinary, even worse, that is not physical, then there's not much that you can do. So I felt that was one of the problems, and maybe that is one of the problems in the other research, and we need to see how to fix this. Much harder for children to specify age of the experiences. By the way, children don't like very much to talk about their experiences. They don't even know what words to use. So when you talk to them about energy, which for me is a natural concept, energy from me, energy around, for them, they don't want to talk about energy. They want to talk about their mind. So I use my mind. They don't like to say I use my energy. It's boring. You say, do something with your energy. For them, it's not natural. So that's something we learn from there. And when you ask them, how long ago was that? How old were you? They have trouble saying that. But when you ask to an adult, it's like this. They say, I had that friend I used to be in that school, so it was this age. So they figure out from the context. So this is something that needs to be acknowledged, I think. Very complex experience. Hard for a child to verbalize, would be hard for us too. Some hypotheses that I have that I'm going to explore more is that psi phenomena are more frequent in children than in adults. Because almost every case of these individuals here, they told me they have less ostensive experience later in their lives than used to be. And I'd say that's my case too. So maybe it's just because it happened to be, it's just random. Maybe there is something there for us to study. The limitation in the vocabulary and conceptual notion hinders memory and grammar. Sleep paralysis happens more during and after adolescence. That is also my impression from comparing statistics from this study of mine with others. Extreme fear is not natural or irremediable. Most of the cases of extreme fear was lack of information or religious backgrounds. They were afraid because they were taught to be afraid. Or they were really perceiving something bad. If you perceive something bad, it's natural to be afraid. What you have to teach is how to deal with that. But in the other cases that fear was present was more than anything lack of guidance. It would be interesting to think how much we have space to approach this type of phenomena scientifically. And I don't mean scientifically by the seriousness, by the objectiveness, or by the unbiased approach, or by the method of study, but I mean in terms of how much we can reach the traditional, the mainstream scientific community. So we need to adapt something. We need to, and of course, we are here discussing this for 3 days. I'm not saying anything new, but something must be done so that we can study this in a more neutral way and we can encompass all of this information that we are generating here. I think we can generate something like a catalog that describes the psi phenomena and their signs. So both parents, educators, and also maybe doctors, podiatrists, can recognize these signs and distinguish them from other different phenomena. Perhaps we could create or propose an independent discipline, whatever that's called, a holistic, integral, whole psychomedical discipline independent from the other ones. Because I think this cannot be continued to be studied under psychiatry because it's a completely different approach. But then we hit all of the problems we have already discussed. We would then talk about guidance and support rather than treatment. And parents lack tools and substantiated information. So the future steps that I see for this study here, number one, I want to do a study with a control group. And of course, for this, I'll have to get people who never, who do not approach me. I'll see how I get a sample of that, because those that I have interviewed, somehow I interviewed them because I thought they had some sort of psi phenomenon. I wanted to learn from those experiences. But I need to get the general public so that I see what points are different, what goes on there. Also, I intend to do a survey of the general population, just with very fixed questions, but that would help to enlighten some things. study on specific aspect of psi experiences in childhood, because once we screen all that, we filter, and we learn from this study, we can focus on specific aspects, and I think we can develop more on those and see better tools to help children in that condition. And I intend to publish a book that I said accessible. I do not know how that is going to be done, but I'll have to find a way. Because of course, when you discuss about this, you hit on people's beliefs, scientific beliefs, religious beliefs, and all of different types of belief. On the other hand, children need help. So what can we do about it? So I have been doing this study pretty much on my own in the time I have available, but I hope to have this done as soon as possible, relatively soon, maybe a few years, so that I can have this published. And to conclude, that's my last slide. I just wanted to leave here two manifests somehow, two subjects, one 13-year-old, the other one 38, that suffered a lot with that because was taken as a psychiatric case. So the girl says, please tell parents to see this as a natural thing. This will relieve the weight on the child. Otherwise, the child will try to block what they actually feel. And subject 21, 38 years old, don't medicate your child. Please listen to them first. And that S is too much there. But so I think this is pretty strong, requests. When they knew I was writing a book, that's what they asked me, and I have many similar ones. So maybe it's time for us to do something. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I don't have time for questions. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks.